When I made my first ever YouTube channel back in 2015, the first ever video that I actually set as a public upload was the first part of a Skylanders Swap Force Let's Play, where alongside the whole thing being shot on an SD camera pointed at my TV, I decided to say this.
If you have no idea what Skylanders are, get a grip!
So clearly I thought that at the time Skylanders trilogy was pretty good, and now since the first Skylanders game has just turned 10 years old, I thought it'd be a good excuse to look back on the game now and see if it holds up as much as I thought it did, with a fresh perspective on the franchise as a whole. So join me as we take a look back at the game that built a gaming empire in Skylanders Spyro's Adventure. Although Skylanders is the undoubtable father of toys to life, the idea of putting figures on a thing and having them in a game or even toy connectivity with video games was not a brand new concept in 2011. It actually goes all the way back to the 80s and the 90s, with the electronic toy Rob the Robot on the NES and the proto-Skylanders game Redbeard's Pirate Quest on the PC. Other versions of the technology existed before the first Skylanders game was released in like the 2000s, most of them being gimmicky toy lines or children's computer games. So when Skylanders came along with its placing figures on the portal of power mechanic, it was pretty revolutionary at the time. The game was originally conceptualized as a Spyro the Dragon title, but since no one liked the Legend of Spyro, it was changed to be focused on the then outlandish Toys to Life concept, eventually losing its Spyro theming but still keeping small elements of the franchise. The game was originally slated for a 2010 release exclusively on the Wii, but as more features got added and the game was polished up, it was pushed back and was ported to other consoles. I first heard about Skylanders after it had released in around early December of 2011 from some family friends in Australia, who, despite being older than me, had a lot of good things to say about it. And from what I remember, I was able to play the first level with them. And from when I got it for Christmas that year, I was hooked on Toys to Life, and stayed that way until after the cancellation of LEGO Dimensions, where I kind of fell off and didn't even bother to play the last two Skylanders games. Until doing my Let's Play in preparation for this video, I haven't really touched these games since getting the original Skylanders trilogy on Xbox 360, as I did originally own them on the Wii, and even then I've only played a few levels into the game, like briefly over the years. So now it's time for what you've all come here for, Skylanders Spyro's Adventure. This game is interesting to try and define, as it takes elements from all over the place that future games in the series would expand upon. Whilst being an action-adventure game, it takes inspiration from RPGs in that there's a variety of different characters you can play as who have a range of abilities that can be upgraded, each with a skill tree that focuses on either the primary or secondary attacks and a special, more expensive move that can only be unlocked when a soul gem is found in a certain level. Skylanders also have the ability to collect gold and level up with XP with a level cap of 10, both of which are exclusive to the Skylander and not to the player, so some amount of management is required in order to get the maximum possible power in each Skylander. Upon starting a new save and getting past a brief introduction cutscene, we're slap bang into Chapter 1, where a village is being torn apart by a tornado, and you're pretty much just ushered to follow along the level's path to see what's going on. The level serves as a really good introduction to what at the time was a pretty new type of game, setting up a lot of things that will be present in most levels, like pushing blocks, fighting enemies, platforming with bounce pads because jumping is non-existent, and the elemental gates, which are directly pointed out to the player through dialogue.
These are elemental gates.
After fleeing from the tornado, we're introduced to the Skylands, a world of floating islands that was protected by the Skylanders, a group of beings who were led by a Portal Master, with the Portal Master in question being Eon, who guards the Core of Light. But the darkness has begun to return, being commanded by the evil Portal Master Chaos and his minions, and he actually does look kinda cool as this giant head, but then any sense of anyone taking him seriously even slightly is instantly ruined when he's revealed to be an incompetent and petulant joke.
Fear it! Fear my giant floating head!
See? I told you the head isn't scary enough.
Even when he destroys the Core of Light, which is pretty important considering it's the main plot point of the entire game, they still have a bit where he gets flung back by the shockwave and like screams, just to make sure whatever threat he posed to the player is now gone. Any attempt at comedy with Chaos will probably be lost on anyone above the age of 5, but at least there is a saving grace that he doesn't appear that much throughout the game, only about 4 or 5 times in total. So Chaos destroys the Core of Light, which kills Eon and causes him to become a lingering spirit spirit and shrinks all the Skylanders down and sends them flying to Earth. This is a pretty cool concept to explain why you need the toys in order to play the characters in the game. But as we'll soon learn when we take a look at the other games in the future, this concept of how you get the Skylanders as little figures would later become a story constraint more than just a fun story element for the game. All of this is told to the player by Hugo, who essentially acts as this game's exposition dump, with very little personality outside of that he's not too fond of danger and is afraid of sheep.
And if you bring back any more of those sheep, I'll never forgive you.
Outside of that purpose, he's a pretty useless character, and if he didn't show up to speak at the end of every level, you'd probably forget about him entirely. It's the same story with most of the other characters, unfortunately, with the balloonist Flynn being quite charming but held back by having the stupid and overconfident character type slapped onto him, and Callie just being a way to give the player more challenges, despite the entire second chapter being entirely devoted to find her, and she's narratively useful for the next 2 chapters after that. There are also several other characters that are introduced periodically that act as guides into the new areas. They're all different and have a large enough inclusion in the game so there's less chance of forgetting them, but aside from a few entertaining elements in the other ones, my favourites turned out to be Gurglefin and especially T-Bone, because although they both spewed bad fish and skeleton puns respectively, some of them did get a chuckle out of me.
Cha cha cha!
But now it's time for the main bulk of the game. A hunt for the pieces of the Core of Light across the game's various chapters in order to reconstruct it to keep the darkness at bay before it covers all of Skylands. The game is structured in 2 to 3 chapter segments that encompass a different element, getting smaller pieces of the core in the earlier stages before getting the elemental sources of that particular element in the last one. The chapters take place across a variety of landscapes and settings that all fit with their particular elements, such as the coastal settings for the water source, the underground crypts and dark castles for the undead source, and the treetops for the life source. Most of the levels are quite enjoyable, or at least are not bad, with some of them even being really good, such as Leviathan Lagoon for its more open design, the short and simple treetop terrace, and the cinematic awe of the Archean Armory. But as with anything, there are some pretty shit levels too, like the frustrating Troll Warehouse, the chore that is Darkwater Cove, the overuse of shooting sections in Sky Schooner Docks, and both the Crawling Catacombs and Cadaverous Crypt, which despite having the nice undead aesthetic, are quite tiresome to play through. And in the mission for the Eternal Sources, every now and then in the final chapter of the section you come across Chaos, which leads to a boss fight against 3 evil versions of Skylanders of the relevant element that are fought one by one and then all together at the end. These fights are all the same ordeal with not much variation apart from the different spells used, which consist of a bunch of sharks, spirals of green orbs, strings of lasers and falling fiery rocks. The spells by themselves don't tend to be that much of a challenge, but it can be frantic and even a little fun to face off against everything at once. The other Eternal Sources vary from being guarded by a few enemies to a boss battle of sorts, with the Stone Golem and the Troll Super Tank, but they're not really that interesting because all you have to do is let the golem throw rocks at itself to kill it, and pull a move straight out of Modern Warfare 1 and throw bombs at the back of the tank in order to destroy it. Now it's the level design that I feel might make or break the game for most people, as most of the chapters are completely linear, with one straight path leading to the end with only 1 or 2 branching paths. This is only broken in some areas like the Cadaverous Crypt, which takes place all in one big area where the moving ever-shifting hall takes you around the different sections to push cannons around to blow up walls in order to progress, which eventually culminates into getting to the final room. Whilst the linear nature of levels means that the only real objective is to get through it to find the item at the end, there are also additional completion and collection challenges. Although completing the collection challenges really just serves to help you get more achievements both in the game and on the console, with the collection challenges requiring you to go out of your way to find a lot of useless items like the legendary treasures that just don't add anything to the game at all. However, what might otherwise be a repetitive game structure is made a lot more interesting by all 36 Skylanders being separated into one of the 8 elements: air, fire, water, earth, magic, tech, life and undead, which allows for their abilities to get boosted in certain areas.
You need a water Skylander. You need a tech Skylander to unlock this game.
With this, you're encouraged to constantly change what Skylander you're playing as, which makes what might be pretty boring levels feel unique with the different feel of every Skylander, adding some much needed variety, although that doesn't mean you'll be prevented from playing whatever Skylander you want at any given time. This elemental mechanic also opens up these elemental gates that I mentioned earlier, which provide an extra set of areas usually with some kind of puzzle, platforming or combat section involved that can contain treasure chests, and at the end, these hats that, whilst giving receiving stat boosts when equipped, can also sometimes improve a Skylander's luck. The different elements also allow for certain abilities, such as Earth Skylanders being able to smash these rocks, and Water and Fire Skylanders being able to get across water and lava respectively without flying. Although none of this is really ever indicated to the player, so I'm not really sure how you're supposed to figure these out. I don't want to seem like I'm being too positive about this game, because like everything there are quite a lot of problems here. As the ability to jump isn't in the game, a lot of time is spent doing the most asinine thing one can do in a game in order to progress. Block pushing puzzles, which would be interesting if this game was released in 1998, but nowadays and back in 2011 it was just a chore to do. The other main type of puzzle is pushing around these crystals in order to focus a laser towards somewhere. It's not that much better because it's basically just a block pushing puzzle with some extra thought needed. And for some things that probably count as nitpicks, the subtitles are absolutely horrendous, and despite the voice acting, the characters' mouths almost never match up to what they're supposed to be saying.
Go on, get on with it.
It just looks cheap. You also have the stuff that was clearly included because this is a kids game, such as that almost everything is explained to you, the game constantly gives you hints, and the underwhelming characters and the lack of any real development. However, a lot of the negative stuff about this game, for the most part, is not that much of an issue. At least, to me, it really wasn't, because a lot of your time in Skylanders Spyro's Adventure will be spent having fun. The game's main element of beat-em-up style combat is very fun to play, and the enemy types are varied and mostly interesting. And because of the different playstyles of the Skylanders, it adds a new level of strategy as to who you use, when and where. Because once they're dead, they're out for the rest of the level. The only exceeding problem is when the combat or level progression slows down with the randomly introduced mechanics like the heavy use of turrets early in the game, or the on-rails section in the War Machine, which do break the pacing, but are not so prevalent throughout the course of the adventure as to spoil the game as a whole. And whilst we're on the topic of the levels, the soundtrack to this game is way better than it has any right to be. If you didn't notice, I've been playing it throughout the video, and it is seriously one of my favourite video game soundtracks. Every level's personality is amplified tenfold by the soundtrack, mainly due to how different they all feel and how well the songs fit with each level. And you know they must have cared about the music, as they actually got Hans Zimmer to do the main theme. Yes, the Hans Zimmer that composed 2 hornpipes from Pirates of the Caribbean. But after retrieving all the parts of the Core of Light and stamping through the Archean Armory to find the Eternal Magic Source, the darkness is finally expelled from Skylands and Chaos is sent flying back to the Outlands. But since he still has the power to destroy the core again, which for some reason he didn't do immediately as it was reconstructed because the darkness was surrounding the core, we need to get to Chaos's lair and stop him once and for all. Well, at least until Giants rolls around. So by travelling in the most unusual way, it's time for the final chapter, the Lair of Chaos. The first part of the level involves getting to Chaos's floating castle, and there's really not much to talk about here aside from the fact that at this part where you have to click 3 keys, there's so much waiting to move on these platforms. Seriously, it takes longer to do this than it does to load a level. But after that, it's time to battle Chaos, where the creature that destroyed the Core of Light is finally revealed. The Hydra. Chaos is still the final fight though, as all the Hydra really does is just create elemental spells based on those in the previous Chaos fights, whilst Chaos sends out his Skylander minions and comes down on his flying throne every now and then to get hit. And that's just the first part of the fight, because as the minions are slowly destroyed, you're just left killing time as you wait for Chaos to come down at the beginning of each new spell. Despite my previous touting of this fight as really difficult, and one of the hardest I had ever played, it's just long and tedious. Sure, I did lose a good chunk of my Skylanders, so you're definitely going to have quite a lot, and it will probably be a harder fight if you didn't have as many as I have, but I never really felt threatened at all or like that I was going to lose at any point. When I first played this fight, I remember needing my friend to help me because he had the other 2 Adventure Pack figures, which could deal a massive 999 damage, but this time I only needed one, and that was mostly to just speed up an over 40-minute boss fight. The final encounter wasn't what I expected it to be at all, and whilst it wasn't incredibly annoying or massively frustrating, it was just kind of meh, which in some cases is a lot worse. I would have loved it if it was just a lot better or a lot shorter, or combine some kind of enemy gauntlet at intermediate points just to keep you awake. But as it is right now, it's not too awful of a way to cap off the game. So now with Chaos beat, he gets the best punishment possible, being sent by the core down to Earth in a tiny form to suffer the same fate he gave the Skylanders. And with this, Skylands is now saved, and your allies give you somewhat congratulatory messages.
My word! You've done it! You've actually done it! I knew you could!
Wowzers, this might even make you almost as popular as me. Almost.
After completing the main story, there are several other things to do aside from just going back to replay the levels in order to 3-star all of them. There are heroic challenges that you get from Callie, with one for each Skylander, which are timed missions in different environments based on the story missions that range from move around the map with the correct teleporters, or kill 100 chompies in the most time efficient way possible, to destroy the 9 possessed cat statues without hitting a certain number of vases. Considering I had no idea what I was getting into for these, I found the heroic challenges to be a lot of fun, with the majority of them being hectic logic puzzles with plenty of combat with enemies from throughout the game, with the challenges that the game designates as hard being a lot more about strategy and planning in order to win, all of which I really like. And in addition to the main reward of a boost of a specific stat depending on the challenge, it's also a really good way to level up Skylanders. In addition to the main story levels, there are also 4 bonus levels that are available through purchasing adventure packs that included an exclusive Skylander with 2 magic items. I've neglected to talk about the magic items up until this point in time because I didn't really use them throughout my main playthrough until the adventure packs, but they basically act as power-ups, whether that's through helping to block damage, raining anvils from the sky to damage everything on the screen, spawning companions that damage enemies, or making you go a lot faster. They're all quite useful and are definitely worth purchasing if you want a little extra punch. Although it is fair to say that the levels range heavily in quality. At the lower end is Pirate Seas because of the slog that is pirate cards. Seriously, it's just snap, it's not challenging. And one of the last moments is a shooting section at a pirate fortress that doesn't really control correctly and has cannons that move across the air. Empire of Ice is like that as well, but unlike the nice pirate theming, the ice theming is just boring. And it also ends in a turret section that feels a bit too much like a mini-clip flash game that you'd play in primary school for my tastes. Dragon's Peak is a little bit better, as despite the heavy inclusion of flying around on a dragon, as a dragon, to get from island to island, the combat at the end is fun with how many enemies are thrown at you, but mostly it just plays like a mediocre Skylanders level. Darklight Crypt, however, is probably one of the top 10 best levels in the whole game, if not just for the fact that the premise of switching between the normal world and the ghost world with switches is just so creative. And then there's the actual best character in the game, Batterson, who has been selling his pies to ghosts, which they've enjoyed so much that they've stopped feeding on brains. But now this giant eye has shown up and it's banned all the pies, so the ghosts are really grumpy and Batterson's not earning enough, so the bank's gonna close down his store, and it's also wonderfully ridiculous, and it's just hard not to love it. And I sympathise with the ghosts here, you know, I'm from New Yorkshire, I know the importance of pies in a diet. I get it. A universal complaint I have for the adventure packs is they all don't really have boss fights, so it does get a little disappointing when a fun level is capped off by a disappointing ending. But yeah, this aspect of the game is definitely a mixed bag, but if you are planning on playing Skylanders, I would definitely recommend getting Darklight Crypt to go with it. The game also has a local co-op mode called Battle Arenas, where you face off against another person in 3 different game modes: Arena Rumble, Sky Goals, and Sky Gem Master. This feature of the game is thoroughly enjoyable, if grossly underdeveloped. The fun Skylanders combat is mixed with the advantage of going against another player, which is great as it allows for 2 players to have their own Skylanders fight, or for 2 people to just pick up one person's figures and play, which the 3 Skylanders starter pack fully supports. However, there are only 4 base arenas, with 4 more being unlocked with the adventure packs, with limited customization options. There are also items, although very few, with the main extras of the arenas being the specific trap, such as rising sewage in the aqueduct, or the pit spikes in the Cyclops arena, which apart from just the wide difference in designs, helps make all of them feel unique. The other 2 game modes are just fine, if a little lacking, with the goals of throwing a football through a goalpost and collecting all 5 coins. But it would have been nice to just have a little more time go into their development to make each game mode feel like a worthy inclusion. Like maybe the stages could have changed something for each mode to make them feel more suited to their objectives or something, but the PvP aspect is much appreciated and it's something that I would actually want to play with people, and I really hope that it was developed further in future titles. And just before we wrap this up, we need to talk about one of the biggest criticisms levelled at this game and the franchise as a whole, Spyro himself. And I'm with Square Eye Jack on this this one, I do and have always seen this game as a continuation of the Spyro games, and although Skylanders would later head even further away from the Spyro series, he remained a prominent character, and there's very clearly a lot of similarities in level design between both properties. And I've never really understood the amount of hate for Spyro's design. Sure, I like the PS1 Spyro more than any other, don't get me wrong, but he looks quite a bit better in this game compared to whatever was going on in the Legend of Spyro games. It's not really that bad, and his inclusion in the franchise kept him more alive and relevant than Crash Bandicoot over the past decade, that's for sure. Overall, I can say confidently that despite its flaws, I would recommend picking up and playing Skylanders Spyro's Adventure on any of the home consoles it released on. Just don't get the DS version, don't do that to yourself. Although I was originally unsure of what my conclusion would be before making this video, as I thought the amount of kiddie stuff would ruin an experience for any older people wanting to try it. But despite those elements of it, and minus a few crap parts of the game, this game tries something new and is a blast from start to finish. And because it's been 10 years since its release, the starter pack can be picked up online for relatively cheap, with a lot of the individual figures being sold for pocket change online, allowing you to experience pretty much everything this game's got to offer on a good budget. I certainly enjoyed my time with this game, and it's made me very enthusiastic to look at the rest of the games in the franchise and the other Toys to Life games in the future. But for now, I think I've said my piece on this subject. Skylanders Spyro's Adventure gets my official rating of a Dark Spyro out of PS1 moneybags.
Ah, you must be the dragon everyone is talking about.
Thank you all for watching. I hope you have a good day, and goodbye.
You have done well, Portal Master. We may have seen the last of chaos and the darkness, but there is more to do. The journey with your Skylanders is only just beginning.